Today we'll be listening to the story of Bartolomeu Dias from the book Around the World in 100 Years by Jean Fritz. After Prince Henry of Portugal's death, King Alfonso took up the exploration and in 5 years lengthened the African coast by another 1,500 miles. Still, the question of how far Africa extended south had not been answered. King John the Perfect, who came to the throne in 1481, was determined to find out. He wanted that spice trade, and since the land route to China had been closed by the Turks in 1453, the only way to go, King John figured, was by sea. He knew Africa must end somewhere, and if he could sail around it, perhaps he could cross the Indian Ocean to Calicut, a trading centre that everyone knew was on the coast of India. Let's pause for a minute. If you have a look, Lisbon is right on the very western edge of Europe, and the thing that made the Portuguese determined to find a route to the east or to India of their own was the fact that the goods that were collected by the Italians and distributed along the Mediterranean coast became more and more expensive the further west they went. So they would start off at a certain price when they left Venice or Genoa, but by the time they got to Lisbon, various taxes had been added to them, and not only that, other people had bought all the good stuff, so the Portuguese were really left with the scraps, so that made them really determined to find a route. Let's get back to the story. One thing, however, still hampered explorers. Normally, they fixed their position by looking at the North Star, but when they were south of the equator, the North Star disappeared. Not only that, the maps you can see on this slide are pretty much what the sailors had to go on, the navigators. You can see they only showed the northern half of the hemisphere and only half of it at that. So the maps were really not very good. Back to the story. Only when they sailed close to the shore did the navigators feel safe, in sight of land and the stone markers that previous explorers had set up as guideposts along the way. But sometimes they were driven into the open sea. And then what? Then all they could do was pray. How could they know where they were when the water was the same on all sides and the sky was like a foreign country that had betrayed them? So King John taught his explorers how to find their latitude by determining the height and angle of the midday sun and checking it against new charts that his astronomers had made. Then he picked the man who was supposed to bring back the answers. The Dias brothers were all explorers, but for this trip he chose Bartolomeu Dias, who had been in charge of the royal warehouses in Lisbon. In August 1487, Bartolomeu set sail with 2 caravels and a store ship carrying extra food and supplies. This was the first time a store ship had accompanied an expedition, so King John obviously expected Bartolomeu to be away a long time. He also expected him to come home with answers, and spices and gold too. No experienced sailor, however, could hope to be away long without running into a storm or two. Still, Bartolomeu had never seen such a storm as swept his ships off the southwestern coast of Africa. There they were, sailing peacefully along, their course set for the mouth of the Congo River, when all at once the world went mad. Mountains of water attacked them. The sky itself descended. The wind flung the ships about as if they were toys, and it became cold. They had been in the tropics when the storm hit, so how could it suddenly turn so cold? Where could they be? King John had told them to look at the midday sun. There was no midday sun, no night sky. They must be in the unknown. It was easy enough to laugh at the old stories about the unknown when they were on dry land, but not now, not when they were on the brink of an icy death. The storm raged for 13 days, but when it was over, the 2 caravels were still afloat. The store ship was gone, but the men wouldn't need stores now. Surely their trip would be cut short. Surely they would go straight home. That is, if they could find home. Bartolomeu Dias studied the noonday sun in his charts and ordered the ships to go east. And they did, day after day. But there was no land in the east. So Bartolomeu said, "Go north." Finally, On February 3rd, 1488, they saw a bump of land sitting on the horizon, waiting for them like an old friend they'd never expected to meet again. When they observed that the coastline continued north, they realized that they were on the other side of Africa. They'd gone past the southern tip without even knowing it, and now they were going up the eastern shore. They were sailing in the Indian Ocean, and as far as they could tell, it was open sea. Bartolomeu dropped anchor and went ashore with his men to get fresh water and put up a padrero, a stone marker, the first marker on this side of Africa. He was so proud of that marker, standing so tall on a green pasture amongst grazing cattle and naked herdsmen. He called the place Herdsman's Bay, although the herdsmen had run off at the sight of strangers. Later, peeping over a hilltop, they threw stones down at the white men. Bartolomeu did what Portuguese explorers had learned to do when Africans were not cooperative. He shot one of them with a crossbow, and the rest of the herdsmen disappeared. I wonder how they felt about these strange people that had arrived on their beach. Bartolomeu was ready now to sail up the coast and then across the Indian Ocean, but his men objected. Even the officers objected and threatened to mutiny. They had had enough of the open sea. They knew the shape of Africa, and that would satisfy King John. In the end, Bartolomeu was forced to give in, but on one condition only. Each of his men would have to sign an oath stating that Bartolomeu Dias was not responsible for changing the course. The men agreed, and reluctantly Bartolomeu turned around. He hated to leave his stone marker behind. Looking at it, he said that he felt as though he were taking his last leave of a son condemned to exile forever. To think, he said, that he'd come such a long way and God would not grant it to me to reach my goal. But at least on the way back, they saw the point where Africa ended, which they'd missed before. Africa did not just dribble away to nothing. Before it stopped going south and turned the corner to go north, it flung up a rocky cliff that jutted out to sea, a dramatic goodbye to the continent. Bartolomeu called it the Cape of Storms, and landing nearby, he took sightings and drew a chart to show to King John. Bartolomeu Dias and his 2 caravels arrived back in Portugal in December 1488. They'd been away 16 months and 17 days and had added 1,400 new miles to the map. When Bartolomeu made his report and showed his charts to the king, there was another sailor who later claimed to be present, a man by the name of Christopher Columbus, well known in Portugal, who was now soliciting Queen Isabella of Spain to support a venture of his own. It was strange that King John would allow a potential competitor to look at those charts, since Portugal always tried to keep its discoveries a secret, especially from the Spanish. Yet Christopher Columbus claimed that he was present and did see just where Bartolomeu Dias had gone and what he'd found. Although King John was pleased with Bartolomeu's charts, he did not care for the name that Bartolomeu had given the cape at the tip of Africa. Who would seek a cape named the Cape of Storms? He renamed it the Cape of Good Hope. Although Bartolomeu Dias was obviously the most experienced man to command the next expedition, he was not asked to do it. Instead, he was given the job of supervising the building of ships. Perhaps the king thought Bartolomeu had shown weakness when he turned back. In any case, King John became too busy with Portuguese troubles to go scouting for silks and spices. No one went to the Indies for another 9 years. Bartolomeu Dias did, however, have one more trip at sea. In 1500, when Pedro Cabral was given a fleet of 13 ships to go to Calicut, Bartolomeu had the command of one. He must have looked forward to greeting that stone marker he'd planted. But he never had the chance. The fleet ran into a storm off the Cape of Good Hope. 4 ships were lost, and Bartolomeu's was one of them. Although he'd escaped death at sea once, he did not escape it this time. And that's the story of Bartolomeu Dias.